Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi there. I am Bob Stergos, and I was the former English teacher and journalism teacher at Hazelwood East High School.
Could you please explain your connection to this case?
Well, because I was there all the way up until the time that the newspaper, that last issue was pulled, or at least the center spread of it was pulled, I was connected to those young people. I helped supervise the production or the writing of those stories and the concepting and even selection of the topics. And I just felt a great bit of identity with what they were going through. I felt bad for them that despite all that effort, they were not going to see those articles published. And they'd worked on them basically for a large part of the semester. And so that was my connection. So I got to, we'll go through that later. But I mean, it was a tough time, particularly for the students.
Yeah.
I left to go into business right at the business world. We were starting to raise a family, and teacher pay back then was not very good, and it was going to be hard to raise a family on what I was making as a teacher. And so had to make a very tough decision, and I would have loved to have timed it. It would have had the timing be that I would leave after the school year, but the start date at the company I was going to was going to be May 3rd. And so I think whatever the last day of April was, that was going to be my last day. And so I wasn't there to finish out the school year with students.
Could you talk a little bit about your role in the Journalism 2 class and what your role was as the teacher?
Well, and journalism too, especially, these are either people who are starting to identify that they really do like journalism, that they perhaps maybe want to explore it as a career, or at least maybe as a college major. And so you don't get into that class just to, in a lot of schools back in the late 70s, early 80s, I would say maybe a half of the journalism programs were comprised of kids who got the popular kids who got to walk the halls and interview their friends and do stories about the football team and homecoming and all that kind of stuff. That was not here. These young people worked their tails off, and you didn't take this class for fun. You took it because you liked the subject matter and you wanted to write and you wanted to do, good journalism. So it was, my role was to help guide them. And they start to be more autonomous, more self-directed in journalism too, where you have an editor and an assistant editor and you have editors per section, and they get to make a lot more decisions as they move along and have an increasing voice in the production of that newspaper.
Okay. Could you kind of talk about why you thought this kind of class was important, why students should be involved in these kind of things?
I think more than most classes in high school, think through the average subjects of math and science and even literature. Literature, of course, I was an English teacher, so I valued that as well. But I think more than most, journalism causes you to do some very critical thinking. What are the subjects we're going to expend energy about? What do people need or want to hear about? What should we, as good journalists, be compelled to write about? We're not here to just be an extension of the public relations arm for a school district, nor are we to tear it down. We're here to be good journalists. And unfortunately, I think they maybe got cast in a light that people were concerned there was going to be bad publicity for the district, when in fact these students were trying to address in a very meaningful way some issues that they were facing every day. And so anyway, my role was to help guide that critical thinking, but foster it to get them. And part of that is an interchange with maybe administration. If there are questions, I wish I could have been there to foster dialogue. That's, to me, is the single biggest thing that was lost in this. Is I'm not sure there was a healthy dialogue and or a good teaching of how to handle potential conflict, particularly from the adults in the room, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So when it came to the students picking like these big deal issues that you're talking about, it would normally be the students that would choose these topics?
It would be for the majority. I would probably give them input. I mean, I can't think through every single issue and the like, but if I thought it was maybe beneath them or wasn't challenging enough, I would probably challenge them to do something else. But that was probably more of just a general mode of operation. It wasn't, I can't give you specifics per se, but yeah, they all strongly suggested various topics, and then we'd go through kind of a stack ranking and a critical thinking process of what are the best ones to go after.
Could you talk a little bit about the approval process for these articles?
Well, in our classroom, the approval process was, first of all, even if you're call it a beat reporter, let's say you're a feature writer or you're a news writer or you're whatever, you're working with your immediate editor of that section and getting topics perhaps approved. Conversely, they then take it to the next level to perhaps the assistant editor or the editor and in conjunction with me. So kind of a teamwork process, but multi-layered. And I would say that was the process. Now, in terms of approval, we didn't routinely have to walk down and show anybody, here's the content. What do you think? Is it okay? To anybody in the administration, to their credit, that wasn't a process with which I'm familiar. That may be in some other districts, but it wasn't at Hazelwood. And so I think that's where it kind of was unexpected, because there really wasn't a process where they or I had to talk, walk the proofs. I was on the second story. I keep saying walk down to the administration, but they were on the first floor. So the net of it is there really wasn't that element of a review. And so the fact that the center spread of a very meaningful, in essence, their research projects for the whole semester, the very pieces that they would use to try and get into Missouri J School or journalism school or other good college programs, was now being taken away. And so if you're a serious journalism student, that's the article you want to put in your portfolio as the lead piece to show you have great writing skills and great research and journalism skills. And that's where I felt really badly for the students, is that I think that could have been avoided with a little bit more of if somebody was concerned, walk the thing back upstairs and say, let's talk and let's work this out. I know you worked hard on these things. And maybe would have found out also that one of the concerns I heard after the fact was that the administrator was concerned that names were going to be published and identities would be revealed and families and people might be hurt. Had there been, I think, an adequate dialogue, you would have found out that those names were only in there for proof stage for the editors of those different sections to verify the names and to verify the quotes. When and if there was sensitive information, those names were going to be out and would have just said, something would have been anonymous. So, and anyway, the just what was missing was that dialogue. And that's as an educator, that was the ultimate thing I think to teach, is how do we handle when we have questions and concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. Were these topics that were discussed in this kind of contentious issue out of the ordinary for this newspaper?
No, in fact, Kathy Kuhlmeier I've heard her at various forums like this talk about, we even found past cases or past articles that also address this. There was a class or two before that had addressed some fairly heavy topics like this. And I wouldn't say even they were, for today's world, they wouldn't be considered heavy at all. But even back then, they weren't salacious. They were just, what does a young person do when they're facing depression? What are the resources for that person? I would think in today's world, we would want to help those kind of issues. What does a young person do if facing a pregnancy in high school and unmarried and the like? And today's world, again, we've come a long way, but it wasn't like it was all that shocking even back then in the 80s.
Yeah. So when it came to kind of these issues that you're talking about students facing and kind of interviewing other students, there were some students that were interviewed in these articles. What were things that you taught your students to do to kind of protect these interviewees?
Yeah, if it was, for instance, I'm just saying, I'm speaking hypothetically 41 years later, okay? But, I mean, the general guideline is we're not here to hurt anybody, okay? And we're here to help. We're here to share information. We're here to offer resources. And so with that as a guiding kind of a principle, if and when there would ever been something that would have endangered somebody or would have put somebody in harm's way or would have been something that should have been dealt with completely offline, maybe with professional counselors or the police or something like that, that really wasn't our place. We weren't going there at all. And if it had been, it wouldn't have made anywhere near this newspaper. So, that's it. Just and again, the part I would say is these young people were well raised by their parents. And to me, it's almost an insult to say that they even had anything, they would even remotely go near that. These are, and 41 years later, it's proven out. You go look at what all these young people are now doing 41 years later, it's proven out. They're all very responsible young people, but I think if we see the best in them back then, we're not as worried about this kind of things.
Did you consider the Spectrum, the newspaper, to be a public forum in the school?
That is a great question. It's one that, I don't know that I could still answer that to this day, and I don't know that I set out to try and answer it back then. Really, I was so focused on teaching the elements of good journalism, and I wasn't there to settle the law of the land, whether this was a public forum or not. So I was more focused on their responsibilities, frankly. Maybe I underserved the journalism world in that I didn't get into their rights. To me, I've got I've got a semester or I've got a year with a young student, and if we can't teach them the basics of good journalism and teach them how to write a good lead and a good headline and a good story that tells the basic facts of who, what, where, when, then if I'm spending all my time talking about court cases, I still haven't taught them to be good journalists. I've taught them maybe to be good lawyers, but so while we spent time on like Tinker versus Des Moines and others, just as a matter of making sure they understood a wider scope of journalism, it really wasn't, I did not wind them up to go test the limits of the law of the land at the time, and nor were they remotely interested in it. They were more interested in, but, I've had students go on and literally work for a major newspaper or two here in our country. And again, if you give the young people credit, they were there to do good journalism. They weren't there to push boundaries or test whether it was a public or not a public, and does the school district have control? It really wasn't even a focus. So I probably underserved journalism world in that respect, but I think we made better students who were more focused on being responsible journalists.
And I know you kind of touched on it, but why did you feel, even not in the aspect of journalism, why did you feel it was important that your students knew their First Amendment rights?
I think if you're going to call yourself an educated person, you should know those things. But again, it wasn't let's go see if we can test the boundaries of that, and let's go make a case that this is a public forum or not. I really, frankly, was not remotely interested. I don't think the students were. That nobody asked me at all. Let's keep going on this topic. It was a matter of public education that they should be informed on it, but didn't spend any more than I had to on the topic because really wasn't focused on going there. Really, the actions of others caused this all to become an issue. It wasn't by any design of anybody in those classrooms.
So going back to the court case the court case that developed from this, how did you find out that the students' articles were removed from the newspaper, and in response, what did you do, or what were your immediate thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure I've got a call or two from the students, one or two, but I also knew the gentleman, a very good friend who is a very good teacher who took my place, coming over from another school, to just make me aware of what happened. And my reaction was just one of sadness. I really was not in a position to be able to do much about it other than empathize and maybe point to some outside resources. I tried to coach a dialogue and say, can we pause and consider who we have here? These young people are some of the cream of the crop of this school. And what I was hearing, there wasn't a very thorough dialogue. And that to me was the major disappointment. I think I probably spent a fair amount of energy on just being sad that there wasn't a very thorough dialogue, particularly the caliber of these young people and how hard they had and how long they had worked on the stories. That didn't add up to me. So I'm sure I talked with several. The teacher that came over and took the place for me for a while those last few weeks, and a few of the students, and then it ended up being I remember Bill McClellan from the Post-Dispatch called called to do a feature on and things like that. But all I could say is I think there was a loss of a learning opportunity of a greater magnitude here.
Yeah, and do you think that they needed to take a legal stance on the issue? Do you support
Well, unfortunately, I don't think they weren't getting much recourse otherwise. I think they tried to explain their case. I think they were as forthright as they could be. And again, I think if you really knew the students, that wouldn't have even been an issue. The character of these young people was above reproach. I mean, they were quality. They and 41 years later, as I just mentioned it earlier, that's proven very true. And they are very passionate about that people get a chance to do good quality stories, and that's carried on. And anyway, I just it's a shame it ended up where it did.
Yeah. And previous to this court case, did you have any articles that had pushback by administration?
I do not remember, and I was just explaining a minute ago, I don't remember a single case where anybody in administration came up and said, "Oh, let's talk about this before we publish this," because I don't remember having any sort of review process like that. I think, and understandably, the fact that I was gone, I get that, because who knows, But again, first of all, consider the quality of the young people. I don't think that would have ever remotely been tried. And the quality of the gentleman who came in to take my place, who was way more experienced even than I was, and even way more respected by, I'm sure, everybody in the administration. I get that because I was gone, you wanted to see it, but I don't recall a review process. And, maybe my memory's foggy after 41 years or so, but I don't remember ever having to do that. And so it just seemed out of character. Hazelwood East and the district was well known as a quality education and the like. It didn't add up. It was a disconnect for me.
And when the case did eventually go to court, did you follow it as it went through the courts?
Well, I had to testify at district level. I testified. And again, they just explained my role in and kind of what we're saying here today, but just spoke in terms of the lack of, I thought, communication between administrators and the students that could have, I think, reconciled this had there been a thorough one. And to me, it's a loss of a teachable moment.
And can you describe your emotions that you felt watching the case?
I did my best as I could, but it dragged out for several years. And so, all of a sudden it would just show up in a newspaper or on, an article, and I really had no warning. Some of them, those updates would even come. So, the Supreme Court case was actually many, many years after even district court here. So, I kept in touch with some of the students and knew things were kind of moving and would occasionally have that. And so again, it was one of empathy. My feelings were one of empathy and sadness for a loss for the greater good in terms of how do we as adults lead young people to work through potential conflict. And I don't think that was done very well.
And how do you feel about the ongoing discussion that the ruling of this case has created?
I'm amazed, and I'm heartened actually that, I saw this center over here in the courthouse and focused on student law and press journalism and things like that. That other than a few select districts around the country in the late 70s and early 80s, that wasn't hardly even a topic, except in the very best of programs. And props again to Homer Hall and Mr. McCauley at Kirkwood High School. They were legendary, and they led the nation, literally, from my understanding, in a very deep program. And I did my master's work under Homer Hall at Kirkwood, and I think learned from the best in the business. And again, these young people were really quality people focused on really quality issues. So anyway, I did try to watch it and follow it as best I could. But was, and again, I don't know that I have formed a solid opinion on whether this is a public forum and by rights the Supreme Court should have ruled one way or another. To me, that wasn't even the issue. It was Are we going to work together with the young people? And do we even value a journalism program? Or said another way, if we were struggling to get a star athlete on a football field for a state championship game, I venture to guess most school districts would, for the glory of their school district, they'd probably do their best to make sure that star athlete is out there. I wonder if there's the same passion for journalism programs, and I have my doubts.
Thank you so much.
Okay.